Alright, so today's video is coming to you to hopefully be helpful if you are someone that is interested in making a demolition derby car and you are new to it. So I'm going to kind of share how I broke down. You can see over there my Cavalier, and then this here is my Ford Fusion. I'm going to explain how I broke down the Cavalier and kind of what I learned, the best kind of process to go through with it, kind of the steps. And again, this isn't a one-size-fits-all. This is for stock demolition derby vehicles in Western PA, Eastern Ohio mainly. We pretty much have the same rules around here. Might be different where you're at if you're in a different part of the country. And again, this is stock. I'm new to the game. This is kind of the simplest way I figured it out to do. If you have a better way, that is absolutely perfectly fine. There's multiple ways to do it, but this is kind of what my thought is after doing the one car, and I'm about to do the second one. So it's kind of broken down to me into three main avenues. You have under the hood some stuff you need to do, outside with like the bumpers and like the gas tank things you need to do, and a little bit with like maybe cutting your fuel line, things like that. And then you have the inside. So the first place I would start is on the inside. So I'll show you my Ford Fusion. This is a 2007. It is power everything, which makes the job a little bit harder, a little bit more tedious. There's a lot more electrical things. There's a lot more just kind of things that can go awry. So the first step in the process of taking apart your car, making it, flipping it, making a derby car, I would start with the inside, and I'd start with the simple things. So you're talking your rear seats, your seat belts, the front passenger seat, which actually the front passenger seat, if you don't want to put your battery and your gas tank right there, maybe you want to put it back here. My tank is currently sitting there. That's M&M Boys. I'm going to put it just a little bit inside where the seat was. You don't have to remove the passenger seat in a lot of stock classes. I did, but if you are, that's where I'd start. They're very simple. You're just undoing some bolts, usually some basic just wrenches, things like that. What you have, you'll be able to do that. And so after you get the seats and those things out that really require no electrical things, anything like that, the seat belts are going to require I think it's a T52 hex bolt. I got mine at AutoZone. You can get them anywhere. Then you're going to start getting into things like, for example, the door panels. So this had door panels over it, same thing there, and whenever you take it off, you can see how there's a lot of wiring. Now these are just like your speaker. This is actually clipping into the, whenever the panel was here, the buttons there for all the plugs, this just clicks into it and runs your locks, your windows, etc. Now the rule of thumb with unplugging things, and again, you don't want to cut wires, I'm going to get to that a little bit later when I get under the hood, but whenever you're unplugging things like this in the door, you unplug all the time, that's not going to be a problem. You're not going to trip any sensors or the computer or anything like that. But the rule of thumb with unplugging wires, like for example, when you get up, maybe along here, some things on the dash, you can see I just have things hanging. If you aren't sure what it does, like again, these things on the door should be fine, unplug it and then start the car. If the car starts and it runs normally, you're perfectly fine. If it doesn't start, plug that thing back in and start it and see if that's something that has to be plugged in for whatever reason. That's kind of the rule of thumb I went through, and it seems to be what a lot of people do. So as you can see, I haven't taken the actual kind of panel off here that has power everything because I haven't taken my windows out yet. So since this one is power, I'm leaving this stuff in until I'm ready to take out the windows shortly before the derby, and I'll just plug my panel back in and I'll lower the windows and start taking things out. So that's kind of the process I went with this. With the Cavalier over there, it is power nothing. It had the crank windows. I took pretty much everything out, even the door crank I just popped off for the window, and then I put it back on whenever I was ready to wind it down and take the window out. So that's what I do. Start with your seats, start with things like the speakers in the back, the door panels. Again, if you're not sure if something needs to be plugged in, unplug it, start the car, you're fine. Something I did do that I wouldn't do is your dash. You pretty much for any stock class do not need to remove or unplug things in the dash. I did, but I really shouldn't have. The only reason why it's beneficial to take the dash apart, or at least the plastic like I did, is you can then run from here over to there, your front kind of bar dash. You can go right over top. I just have the gauges sitting there. You can go right over top of the bar there, straight across, and you can have a nice 4-point cage with the halo bar going right behind the driver. That's the only reason. The reason why, especially if you have a newer vehicle, you don't want to take the dash apart is the dash has a ton of wirings for the radio, different electrical things are in there, the heater, all that stuff. You can leave that stuff in for the Derby. In fact, the majority of people do. It saves a lot of time, and it also keeps you from accidentally unplugging something and maybe tripping a sensor or tripping the computer or something like that. So I did take the dash out. In hindsight, I really shouldn't. I seem to be perfectly fine. As again, as I went and I'd unplug something, I'd start the car, make sure it ran normally. Okay, I'm fine, keep going. So if you want to take the dash out, you can, but especially if it's a newer vehicle, I wouldn't, because you can create a huge headache, maybe even a catastrophic headache. Now, after you get that stuff out and your car's starting to kind of look like mine in here, again, the tank I'll get to here later, then what I would do is unplug your battery, at least the negative, wait a couple minutes, I'd at least wait 5, and then I'd remove your steering wheel airbag and your passenger airbag. Now I have little videos of this, and a lot of people do if you just YouTube it. Not too hard. The Cavalier was a little tricky because instead of just having one on each side, like pinhole I need to poke in and then it releases, you had to go in with 2, and you had to like pinch it a certain way. It was horribly annoying. But take these out, kill the power first, so that way you don't accidentally trip the airbag in the passenger side or the steering wheel here. Take those out, and again, after you did that, you pop them out, you can unplug them, and again, I have videos, there's videos on YouTube. Then again, start your car, make sure it runs normally. Some people say certain cars that will affect the computer and the car running. With this 2007 Ford, I had no problem. Same thing with the Cavalier. Whenever I killed the battery, unhooked them, and then hooked it back up, and it ran normally. But I would do that. So after you've done that, and again, you take out your plastic dash here and just the plastic like around the inside of the door. That's all the inside step stuff. You can see mine. Got some wires hanging because I'm just not quite ready to finish her up yet. Derby's a ways away. Again, I would leave the dash there. The doors I'm leaving there because I don't want to take the windows out so far out and have water and things just pouring in it. Then I'd say you want to stop on the inside and you want to come to the outside. Oh, excuse me. And I would start with the bumpers. Now, the rear and front plastic bumper on pretty much every car is plastic. I mean, there's a couple bolts, there's some nuts, some screws. Really not hard to figure out. Again, I have little videos showing mine. If you just YouTube the car you have, someone will probably show you how you can do it. Take them off. Just be careful, usually in the rear bumper in the center, and same thing in the front. In fact, I can show you the front. There's a sensor there, and just kind of be careful you're not ripping stuff around. I don't even need to lift the hood. So right here's the sensor. I think this might also be a sensor. I'm not sure, but I know this one is. So those are things you're going to unplug later. Make sure, again, it doesn't affect the motor. Just whenever you're taking the plastic bumper off down to this, just kind of be careful of that. Now, pop the hood here. There we go. After you do the outside stuff with the bumpers, really the only thing left to do outside is to drop the fuel tank, unplug it, and again, if you're making a stock Derby, I would carefully drop the fuel tank, which again, just make sure you have your stands there if you're just using a jack. I use Rhino ramps from Walmart. They're like 40 bucks, I think. Ran it up, and then I put jacks under it just to make sure it was stable and safe. You can see this Ford, it actually had this panel right here there that was right above the fuel tank. Made it actually really simple to kind of get to. The top of the fuel tank is where the internal fuel pump and all the plugs are. So what I would do, you've got the inside done now. You've got the airbags out. Again, I'd leave the dash. I'm going to leave the windows for later, so the door panels I'm going to save. Took the bumpers off the front and the back, started the car, made sure everything runs. The motor we don't need to get to until really the very end, and there's only a couple things I do there. So now I drop the tank. And again, when you drop the tank, there's just support straps, and then you have the internal, which you can see this one for the Ford Fusion, that right there on top is what this one looks like. It only has the line sending to from the tank to the motor. Some cars typically will have a sending and a return line. Now you can see here, this is usually what the tanks, I think pretty much every fuel line tank will have. It's kind of a specific clip to where this clicks in and then this clicks down. So to take these off, and again, you don't want to trash these yet. You might be able to use these clamps. I kind of shook these around after I took them off, popped them off the line, and then you can see I went to AutoZone and got my 3/8 high pressure fuel injection line. Don't go cheap or you might have a fire in your car during the Derby, as well as the high pressure fuel clamps. By the way, sorry for the sniffles, I just have allergies and it's something terrible. But this guy just popped this out. I just used a flathead screwdriver and then put the screwdriver in here and push this end out. Excuse me. So once you do that, should just pop off. And then again, the support straps, you just loosen, slowly lower it down. I had the jack under it. As I did it again, kind of made a rough video. Alright, had a coughing episode there. I kind of made a video, jack under it as you slowly loosen the support straps, lower it down, unclick the ones on top. Reason being is you want to reuse that internal fuel pump. That is by far the easiest way to do a Derby gas tank, whether you buy an M&M Boyd's gas tank like this, which I'd recommend, but it is somewhat expensive, if you will. The great thing is I can reuse it over and over. That's the fuel tank fuel pump. And the great thing about using the car's internal fuel pump is you have to have a way to kill power to the fuel pump in a Derby. So if you do anything other than using this car's fuel pump, you have to have an external switch which has power run to it, which is an extra step and is kind of tricky unless you know what you're doing. To where doing it this way, using the car's internal fuel pump, again, when I drop the tank with the jack under it, just carefully lower it down, unplug everything, and then drag the tank out. Use a siphon filter from, or a kit from Walmart. I think it was like $3.50. Drain all the gas out of it, and then you can go to getting the internal fuel pump out. I simply turn the key off and it kills power to that. So again, this one, all it had was the one fuel line, and then it has just the power there clicking in. So just carefully unplug those, drop the tank, drag it out of there, and you're good to go. Whether you use a fish tank, people have used propane tanks. I saw a guy use a keg, which I don't know if that's the best way to go about it, but you know, the M&M Boyd's gas tank, search for it online. It is great. I'd highly recommend it. You can reuse it over and over. So yeah, once you drop it, then you're pretty much good on the outside. The next thing I would do is to continue with the gas tank, is to get yourself whatever you're using for your gas tank. So after you've unplugged it and dropped it, you now want to get it hooked back up, if not in its permanent position, like mine's just sitting here right now. I'm going to put it up in there, but you want to hook it back up to make sure everything's working right. So again, with this one, I had a metal gas tank. So what I did is just carefully use a screwdriver to tap. You can kind of see here, these guys just kind of tap it through. It's probably gonna have to tap it, but they really just turn, but they're locked in there, and then it'll kind of spring up. Carefully pull the internal fuel pump out, put it on a plastic bag, just leave it set for a little while. Then what I did with the aluminum one is I took a reciprocating saw and a metal blade, which I just got from Home Depot, like a 5-pack for 15 bucks or something, and I cut the tank. For this one, you have to cut about 2-3 inches past it. So it has this ring here, just to show you. So this guy, so put this on top of the tank and then drew with a marker around the outside so I knew how much I needed. You can kind of still see some of the marker there. Now because it's metal, I'm not cutting in a perfectly circle. I cut kind of a straight line past and then another straight line past, so you can see how it's not a perfect circle, but that's perfectly fine. You know, it's not jagging anything, it's not cutting anything. That's just kind of the easiest way I found to cut the metal tank. After I did that, again, lined the holes up for this one. If you get the universal tank like me, put a marker in the best I could. You can see how I didn't do a great job the first time, but eventually got it lined up. And the only other thing I had to do for this one, because this had extra pieces stuck out here and they were hitting the bolts, is again I took my reciprocating saw and just carefully cut that excess off. Now there is, and it was the whole way around, there is one more step I'm gonna have to do with this one. I'm actually going to take, just again, pop this up, pull it up, pull the internal tank out. I'm gonna take this, I cut off my tank, just sitting here right now, and I'm actually gonna cut these teeth off, because right now, whenever I put this on top, the bolts aren't quite long enough to clear through there that I can get my nuts on. So I'm gonna cut that off, and then this will press down on this to keep it tight, and it'll be low enough that I'll be able to tighten these bolts. So again, if you use the the universal gas tank from Edmund Boys like me, for the Cavalier, it worked great once I got the gas tank part cut in. It actually wasn't metal, it was a plastic one. Same thing with this one, it'll work great. I just gotta kind of adjust those couple things as I go, but that's the next step. And then get that hooked up, and again, it's not in its permanent position. I have it sitting here, got my high pressure fuel line, as well as high pressure clamps. Don't cheap out there, you'll pay for it in the Derby. The Derby I was in with the Cavalier, in my heat alone, there were 3 car fires because the lines either popped or something went wrong. Don't go cheap here, get the good stuff, and you can reuse it too. That's the great thing about the clamps and the hoses. So yeah, hook it up, start the car, make sure it runs. You've now got the inside pretty much set. Again, we're gonna save the windows for later. You've got the airbags out, you've got the front and rear plastic bumpers, which most Derbies in the stock class seem to require you to remove the plastic pieces just because one hit and they're gonna be busted and down. Then with the outside as well, and you can do this after you do the gas tank, or you can do it when you're taking these off. The headlights and the rear brake lights, they're just on the inside. You'll pop the trunk, pop the hood, unscrew the bolts, unplug the wires, don't cut anything again. They come out, and you've pretty much got everything on the outside done. You've got most everything on the inside done. You've got your gas tank now plugged back in with whatever you're using, and you're ready to go to the motor. All right, so last with the motor, what I did, and again, you don't have to just do this, you can do more, and this is what I'm going to do with this car. I haven't yet. I've just taken the battery out. So the Cavalier actually had side mounting hookups for the batteries, which work great. I simply took a bolt and a nut from AutoZone, I got 6-foot cable brake lines, battery lines to run from here into there. I can again reuse it with this car. Once I take the windshield out, it'll go right through there, and I'll probably go through the dash. But then just ran a bolt through it, tightened it down, electrical taped it real good, and ran it inside to the car, and battery sitting beside the passenger seat worked great. With this one, with the battery, what I'm going to have to do, since it has the top terminals, I'm going to cut the wires right at the base of where the terminal is. I'm then going to use a U-bolt, which you can get at your local hardwood stores. I got mine at a small hardwood store near our house, and then simply crank the line I cut with the 6-foot battery lines I have, and then use that U-bolt to tighten it down tight, and then again electrical tape it so that it's a good connection here running into the battery, which will be in the car. So that's how I'll do this one. Other things in the motor here, all this plastic with the washer fluid and with the air filter, you don't need all that stuff, and it's going to get pressed into the motor and cause damage quicker. So this one has a sensor here, to where the Cavalier, I was able to take all the way back to this clamp, and then just use this clamp to put chicken wire over this and keep it tight. This guy here, I'm going to cut right here, because that sensor's there and I don't want to mess with that, and I don't need to. All this is all I really need off. And then I'm going to put, again, chicken wire, which again I just got at a hardwood store, put it over that, and a really fine close together one, so that it's letting air through perfectly fine, but big pieces of dirt and stuff like that aren't getting through and locking the motor up. More dirt will get through, but that's fine. This thing here I might cut. I'm not really sure what it does. I could just unbolt it here, but I'd have to close that off, so I'll probably just leave that there because it's all the way in here and I'm just cutting it here. So that's what I do with the air filter, and then take all this out. The fuse box, I'm going to unbolt that, and I want to get it as far away from the outside as possible. I'd like to put it right here where the battery was. Now that does depend on the wiring, how close I can get it into here. I at least want to kind of get it over to here, just so I don't take one hit there and I'm blowing fuses. And you might say, oh, how important are fuses? Well, with my first Derby car, the Cavalier, I was going real good. I was down to the last 7 cars, hadn't taken a hit up front yet that did any damage, just a couple little things, no damage, and I blew a 50 amp critical fuse, killed all power to the motor. So I was knocked out by a little fuse. It didn't take any damage, it just popped for whatever reason. So you want those fuses in here as far as possible. Some people even run them inside, but again, I'm not that technical, so I can't do that. Now, only other things up front I do, some people say they remove the overflow for the radiator. I'm not really up on that, so I'm not going to. I'm just not super familiar with how. I think my understanding is you just remove that and run the hoses down, and whenever it gets hot, it's just putting it out down. And again, that plastic thing's something else that can't be pressed in, but I'll probably leave mine there. So the only other thing I'm going to do, other than cutting that, trying to move the fuse box in here, splicing my wires, if you will, with the U-bolt and electrical tape to run into the car, is I want to cut like right here, about a circle like that, and put a tube in there that just like your common, oh shoot, can't think of the tube, but just a tube through there, and then run my wires through there, so that way as the car is bending up, it's not getting pinched by the hood or anything like that. You don't have to do that. I didn't do that with my Cavalier and I was fine, but that's probably best case scenario if you can do that. Radiator nut, I didn't do anything else with. You just have to remove the clamp here. These sensors, again, I'd first unplug this sensor and then start the car, make sure it runs normally. And same thing with the headlights in that. The radiator is run in through these, so you might want to just cut. I had a guy at the Derby tell me anything in front of the motor, wire-wise, you should be fine to cut. So probably what I'll do with this one is I'll cut the wires here, which seem just be for this headlight and stuff. I'll try to see if there's anything important, and if there is, see if I can separate it, and then just electrical tape each one individually so they're not touching and possibly shorting or blowing a fuse out. Same thing over here. And again, after you do that, start the car just to make sure. But in front of the motor should be fine to cut things. And then that's really it. Oh, a PVC pipe. I couldn't think of the word of the pipe. A PVC pipe is what I'd use for running through there, and then the wiring. So that's pretty much all I do for the stock cars and the motor. Now back here, again, talking wiring. There's a ton of these wires that run back here to the speakers. They run back here, as you can see right here, for the fuel pump. Don't do what I did. Wires in front of the motor, the headlights and that, the non-important ones should be fine to cut. Again, just kind of see what you're cutting, cut them, and then make sure the car starts and runs fine. Wires back behind the motor, pretty much from the dash back. Don't cut things. One, because you don't have to. Two, because you might do what I did. I saw in my Cavalier here, same thing, like the fuel pump's running up through here, so I thought, oh, I can cut the wires about a foot past here, won't have a problem, it's not cutting that. Well, sure enough, there was 3 wires, for whatever reason, from here that were running up through here, and I think they went to the rear sensor, but I honestly don't know. It made no sense to me, but when I cut them, I killed the power to my fuel pump. So I had to figure out which of the 13 or 14 wires I cut I needed, and sure enough, there were 3 of them I found. So don't cut any wires back here. All you need to do is kind of break them off the side, you know, get them so they're not up here or back here along the door. And I have my rear seat bar here, and I will with this car. I simply individually kind of tape them up best I could, and then I tape them in a big ball, and I simply tape them to the rear seat bar. They're elevated, they're off the way, they're perfectly fine. You don't even have to do that, it seems, as most people literally just pulled them off here and left them sit in their rear seat. So it's up to you. The thing I would say don't do, don't cut wires back here, or you will create a headache like I had, and I almost had a panic attack as I didn't know what was going on. Alright, so after you've done that, you've got the inside pretty much stripped except for the windows. You've got your wiring kind of taken care of. You've got your plastic bumpers off. You've got your motor trimmed down some. You've got your gas tank taken care of. You're ready to go. The battery, again, I talked about running through a PVC pipe through the dash. You don't have to do it that way. Again, with my Cavalier here, if I can show you, it's sitting here with the tarp over it right there. My wires, I simply ran under the hood, even though my hood got a little bent up with a couple bumps, didn't do any damage. That way, though, you are risking potentially getting your wires pinched. But if you can run a PVC pipe through like the top of the dash and run the wires through there, that's probably your best bet. But for the battery, oh, and real quick, with the rear seats, something I did, and I'd actually encourage you to do this, keep your rear seat and keep your seat belts as well. 9-wire works great for wrapping your doors, wrapping your bumper, wrapping your hood, or excuse me, your trunk, wrapping it. making sure it doesn't come open because that can disqualify you. Also, seat belts work, and you don't have to buy them. Each car is going to have at least, what, 5, maybe more depending on the car. You only need the one over there. You can cut them and then use them. They're super strong. They'll keep your door, trunk, and hood from coming open. Work great. The other thing I keep as you're tearing apart the car is the rear seat. Simply take the spring out of it. I just cut it out of the Cavalier, and then I wrapped it around the bar over there on the door, and then behind me on the bar here to give me extra padding. And definitely on the door, it definitely worked out and was a simple thing that gave me extra padding there. So I would do that. Battery wise, I put mine right here, kind of inside this body mount here. Pretty much every car has. Put it as close to the middle as you can, because you will take damage here in the passenger's door, which can be hit, which I did. I used a U-bolt. I drilled 2 holes through the floor and made an anchor point. You can do that behind here too, but you might actually be able to use, depending on the size of these holes in your body, those. And then all I did is set the battery there and then use a ratchet strap from the front U-bolt point over the middle of the battery to the back, tighten it down, put a rubber floor mat of a car over it. That's all I needed to do. Terminals are coming in, hook them up, good to go. And then I put the gas tank battery right there. I put the gas tank right here, and that's what mine will look like. So that's how I'm going to go about this Fusion. That's how I kind of encourage you to go about flipping a derby car. I'll make a clip here whenever I have this one all done to kind of show you what it looks like after I do all that. And yeah, again, there's no one way you have to do a stock derby car. This is kind of how I would say to do it. Do the inside simple stuff first, the seats, stuff like that, the panelings. Then take your airbags out. Again, make sure you disconnect the battery before you do that. After you do that, I'd leave the windows and the doors, take off your rear and front bumpers. Again, just be careful of the sensors. Take out your headlights, carefully drop the tank. I'd unplug the internal fuel pump and I would reuse it. That is by far the simplest. Don't need an extra hook up a wire or anything like that. Then I'd go to the motor. Again, just a couple things cleaning up, getting your battery terminals. I got 6-foot battery terminals from AutoZone. Can run them from there to here. And oh, I should say, after you've done all that, your car's ready. Now I'd take out the windows. And again, with the power one here, I'm gonna have to plug in the panel, lower it probably about halfway. It depends on the car, and it'll have bolts that you need to loosen that you can then kind of pull up and angle out the doors. Pretty simple process. Again, there's videos online. For these windows, the rear windows, or if your car has a window here like my Cavalier did, and especially the front window, you've got to get down to this padding underneath here. A little tricky. You're likely going to at least crack the windshield. And to explain how I did it, I used a flathead screwdriver, a hammer, kind of like a paint chisel, if you will, for just like scraping paint. And I used a reciprocating saw I used a reciprocating saw, especially for the front windshield. I used the oscillator tool for this to get started. Just be careful with the oscillator tool. It's really hard on it. I actually fried mine. I had to send it away to get it fixed, but it was under warranty, so it's fine. The reciprocating saw is what works best if you're not able to get the screwdriver in there or get it started and you're just like, you know what, forget it. Just take the reciprocating saw, cut right inside as close as you can all the way around. These windows stay pretty together. The front windshield really stays together because of the gel in the middle, and then the loose pieces mostly will fall inside the car. Sweep them up with your shop vac, then take your screwdriver and your paint chisel, whatever, and kind of take out the rubber pieces so you have no glass around. So that's how I did the front and the rear windows. Same thing here, just take the reciprocating saw, get as close as you can. The glass will mostly stay together. Some small pieces will fall in, just sweep them up. Then take your chisel, your flathead screwdriver and hammer and just kind of work around pulling that rubber off. You could tape over it, some people do, but I think it's easiest to just chisel it out and it looks better and there's no glass there. And then you've done it. You've made a derby car. So we'll show this one here in the near future when it's all done at the end of this video, and then it's time to smash them up.